From a critical design flaw that sank this battleship in the middle of the night, and a cowardly South Korean captain who abandoned ship and left his passengers to drown, to a massive container ship that sank off the coast of England during a fierce storm, and a crew member who left the bow doors open, causing this ferry to sink like a brick. Here are 10 ship disasters that shocked the world. It was September 27th of 1994. The MS Estonia, a cruise ferry carrying 803 passengers and 186 crew members, set sail from Tallinn, Estonia, en route to Stockholm, Sweden. Their course brought them into Storm Force 8 winds. The water and winds were rough, but a well-built ferry could handle it. Unfortunately, the MS Estonia was not well built. The Estonia was a roll-on, roll-off ferry, also known as a ro-ro. That meant passengers could drive their cars on and off the boat. The Estonia had what's called a bow visor. Picture the pointed nose of a ship. Now imagine it lifting like a garage door. From there, you can access the cargo bed from the bow of the ship instead of the stern. Bow visors must be in tip-top shape. When ferries like the MS Estonia sail through rough waters, the bow takes the brunt of the force. According to an official report, Estonia's bow visor was so broken that it should never have been labeled seaworthy. Around 1:15 a.m., as the Estonia sailed through choppy waters in the Baltic Sea, the bow visor lifted and broke from the main hull. Water burst through the bow doors and into the cargo bed. Water flooded cabins on the lower decks, and the ship listed rapidly. The Estonia sank stern first around 1:50 a.m., roughly 25 miles away from the Finnish island of Uta. Only 138 people were rescued. The others either drowned in the wreck or succumbed to hypothermia. It was the worst peacetime ocean disaster since World War II, and the deadliest peacetime shipwreck to occur in European waters. People around the world have questioned the official report. They refuse to believe that rough waters sank a modern ferry. In 2020, a documentary covering the wreck suggested an alternative theory. Experts claimed that only a massive external force could have caused the bow visor to fail. There must have been a blast or a collision. Investigators from Sweden, Estonia, and Finland concluded that there is no evidence of an explosion in the bow area or a collision with a vessel or a floating object. They're sticking with the original story. What happens when a routine ferry trip ends in disaster? What happens when that ferry begins listing at such a distressing rate that everyone knows it's about to sink? What happens when the crew promises everything will be okay and then abandons ship to save their own lives? On April 16th of 2014, the MV Sewol set sail for Jeju, South Korea. It had just left port in Incheon, carrying 476 passengers and crew, including 250 high school students. Sadly, the ferry was doomed from the moment it hit the water. At the same time, South Korea had a bad habit of putting profits ahead of people. Corruption and lax regulations led to one of the worst ferry disasters in human history. It began when the captain lied about the cargo on board the MV Sewol. He reported 657 tons of cargo when the ship was really carrying over 2,100 tons. The ship's owner had also added extra berths, making the ferry top-heavy. They also dumped most of their ballast water, allowing them to carry more cargo. Around 7:30 a.m., the ferry arrived in the Mingle Channel. The Mingle Channel is notorious for its rough conditions and whipping winds. It takes an experienced sailor to navigate the waters. For some reason, the captain left the ferry and all of its passengers in the hands of a rookie. Oh, and he was ordered to turn off the autopilot. The current picked up, and our rookie had to make a sharp right turn. The force caused the ship to lose balance and list to one side. The cargo shifted, and because there was hardly any ballast water, the ship couldn't recover. On board, a message came over the intercom telling passengers that everything would be okay. One of the school kids laughed and said, "It's the kind of situation when they tell you, 'Stay put, it'll be okay,' and then they run for their lives." Sadly, that's exactly what happened. As the ship sank, the crew kept telling passengers to stay put and remain in their cabins. Meanwhile, they fled onto the first Coast Guard ship to arrive, including the captain. So much for going down with the ship, huh? As all of South Korea watched the disaster, the government lied and said everyone made it off safely. In reality, of the 476 people on board, only 172 were rescued. Greed and gross negligence sank the MV Sewol. Corrupt regulators were bought off with trips and fancy dinners. All those lost lives were on their hands. In the end, Captain Lee was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. 14 other crew members received 14-year sentences for abandoning the ship and leaving everyone else to drown. Container ships make the world go round. At any given time, hundreds of thousands of 20 or 40-foot containers are traversing the planet. They're why you have coffee every morning, new tires for your car, and the latest gadgets for Christmas. As you can imagine, if one goes down, millions of dollars worth of cargo go down with it. On January 18th of 2007, the MSC Napoli, a South Korean-built container ship sailing under the British flag, was en route from Antwerp to South Africa. While sailing south of Cornwall, Napoli encountered windstorm Kirill. 30-foot waves smashed into the vessel, causing catastrophic hull damage. Water flooded the engine room. The Napoli was doomed. The captain put out a distress call and abandoned ship with his crew of 26. 2 Royal Navy helicopters found them floating in a lifeboat while the cargo ship took on more water. Of course, it takes a long time for a big ship to sink. Tugboats arrived and hauled the Napoli toward the UK. As the ship's condition deteriorated, officials worried it would break apart and sink. So they beached the vessel in Branscombe Bay on January 20th. But that didn't stop containers from falling off and overboard along the way. The Napoli was carrying 3,800 tons of oil and 2,300 containers. The contents of those containers included weed killer, car parts, explosives, fertilizer, Bibles, chocolate, shampoo, wine, vodka, and frozen ducks. Some containers washed ashore, encouraging locals to scour the beach to see what they could find. It got so chaotic that police enforced maritime laws they hadn't used in 100 years. Under the Merchant Shipping Act 1995, which is basically a modern update of the same act from 1854, it is illegal to loot a shipwreck and refuse to return the items. You have to fill out special forms and can only keep the items if the owners don't respond within 28 days. It may have been too little too late, though. Many items, including BMW steering wheels and airbags, were looted and sold on eBay. After finding a massive crack in the hull in July of 2007, officials decided to use controlled explosions to break the ship in half. In the end, the salvage operation cost £120 million and lasted 924 days. When we think of old maritime disasters, the Titanic and the sinking of the Lusitania come to mind. Few people know the story of the SS Morrow Castle and the fire that engulfed the ship off the coast of New Jersey. It was the morning of September 8th of 1934. The Morrow Castle had been operating as a luxury cruise liner since 1930, making the routine trip between New York and Havana, Cuba. She could make the 1,100-mile journey in just under 60 hours, which was unheard of at the time. Even as the Great Depression ravaged America, the Morrow Castle kept sailing. Those who could afford the trip enjoyed the non-stop booze party, as it was legal to drink on the open ocean, even though alcohol was outlawed during Prohibition. Morrow Castle's final voyage began with tragedy. On September 7th, Captain Robert Wilmot succumbed to a freak heart attack. Command passed to Chief Officer William Worms, who was staring down a strong nor'easter on the way back to New York. But it wasn't anything the Morrow Castle couldn't handle. Little did he know, the storm was the least of his worries. Around 3 a.m., while passengers were asleep in their cabins, a fire broke out in the first-class writing room, a space used by the passengers to write letters. It began in one of the lockers, leading some to believe it was set intentionally. Others chalked it up to spontaneous combustion. The fire spread rapidly thanks to 30-mile-per-hour winds blowing it around the ship. Passengers ran to the stern while crew members fled for the lifeboats. Even though the boats could carry 408 people, only 85 made it off the ship. Most of them were crew members who chose to save themselves. Many passengers perished because they didn't know how to use the life preservers. The thick tubes either knocked them unconscious when they hit the water, or they broke their necks. Spectators on the Jersey shore watched in horror as the Morrow Castle burned in the distance. It eventually ran aground near Asbury Park. Its hull became a tourist attraction until it was towed away for scrap months later. To this day, we still don't know how the fire started. Some say it was a freak accident. Others think it was an inside job. Strangely, Captain Wilmot's remains were lost, and an official cause of death was never determined. The HMS Sukhothai was a U.S.-built warship deployed in 1987. It was one of 2 Corvette-class ships built for the Royal Thai Navy. The Sukhothai was highly maneuverable, at least by 80s standards. There was, however, one major design flaw. If water seeped through the exhaust pipes, it would fry the ship's electrical systems. They would be stranded in whatever ocean they found themselves in. On December 19th of 2022, the Sukhothai was on patrol in the Gulf of Thailand, about 20 miles east of Bang Sapan. That's when the 252-foot ship got caught in a violent storm. Strong winds caused the ship to list, exposing its critical weakness. No electricity means no engine, no steering, and no pumps. Other naval ships responded to the wreck, but only one reached the Sukhothai before she went down. The crew was forced to abandon ship. Of the 106 people on board, only 73 were pulled from the water. They were found clinging to life jackets and floating in rafts. The others were lost to the sea. It was later revealed that the ship was en route to a commemorative event for Prince Abhakara Kyartivongse, the founder of the Thai Navy. Sukhothai didn't have enough life vests for the 30 extra officers on board. According to the Navy, the crew knew they lacked life jackets. The waves were bad, but not terrible. The water was about 84 degrees Fahrenheit. While floating in the Gulf of Thailand isn't ideal, hypothermia wouldn't have been an issue. 33 people perished in the wreck. Having 30 extra life jackets would have saved most, if not all, of them. The MS Sea Diamond may have the strangest history of any cruise ship. Built in 1984, she began her seafaring life by making 24-hour trips between Stockholm, Sweden, and Åland, Finland. Between 1992 and 2002, the ship's exterior portrayed the fictional setting for a Swedish soap opera. After her TV days, the Sea Diamond got a $26 million facelift. It was equipped with a swimming pool and sun deck, making it more suitable for modern cruise goers. From then until the mid-2000s, she cruised around the Mediterranean Sea. Then, everything changed on April 7th of 2007. They followed all the safety requirements. The ship was rated for top-notch security and built to survive in iceberg-laden waters. Yet, she ran aground and sank off the coast of Greece after getting a bad dose of misinformation. Around 4 p.m. Greek time, the Sea Diamond crashed into a shallow volcanic reef near the uninhabited island of Nea Kamenni. She listed 12 degrees to the starboard side and began taking on water. Thankfully, the captain and crew sprung into action and began evacuating. There were over 1,100 people on board, mostly American tourists. A group of 77 students from North Carolina had to evacuate via the car ramp, while others climbed down rope ladders. They were relieved when only 4 people suffered minor injuries. But the bad news hadn't come yet. A French father and his teenage daughter were missing and never found. They were presumed lost, and the ship's captain was charged with their passing. But it wasn't necessarily his fault. As the story goes, there was a massive discrepancy between the area's topography and the maps issued to the Sea Diamond. According to their maps, the volcanic reef they struck was supposed to be 187 feet from the shoreline, not 429 feet. In other words, the captain thought he was sailing past it, not right into it. According to a Greek newspaper, the captain was sentenced to 12 years in jail, though it's unlikely he'll serve any prison time. The SS El Faro was a US-flagged cargo ship built in 1975. The ship made a weekly trip between Jacksonville, Florida, and Puerto Rico, sailing a straight-line course that took them east of the Bahamas. She was set to sail on September 29th of 2015, but this voyage would be her last. Tropical storm Joaquin, a soon-to-be Category 4 hurricane, was heading toward the Bahamas. The Faro's captain, Michael Davidson, thought they could beat it before the storm intensified. They left Jacksonville with a boat full of containers, cars, and a crew of 33 people. Davidson's decision might sound reckless, but according to veteran captains, your average tropical storm doesn't usually cancel voyages. Unfortunately, Joaquin wasn't a typical storm. By the time El Faro reached the Bahamas, Joaquin had rapidly intensified to a Category 4 hurricane. On the morning of October 1st, El Faro found itself trapped near the eye of the storm. 50-foot waves crashed into the ship. 125-mile-per-hour winds made sailing through impossible. The ship listed about 15 degrees and was beginning to take on water. Then, the engine failed. A distress call went out, and all communication ceased after 7:20 a.m. By Monday, the Coast Guard feared the worst. El Faro sank about 35 miles northeast of the Bahamas in 15,000 feet of water. Everything and everyone on board was lost. The sinking left us with more questions than answers. Should they have sent a 40-year-old ship into a rapidly developing storm? Probably not. Did tight schedules trump safety? Absolutely. According to reports, the ship could have taken a different course to avoid the storm. It could have traveled east along Cuba through the old Bahama Channel. That would have put a string on barrier islands between it and the storm. However, it would have also added 6 hours to the journey. 6 hours that Captain Davidson refused to spare. The HMS Nottingham was a Type 42 destroyer and part of the British Royal Navy. It was commissioned in 1983 and received an expensive facelift in 2000. The updates were supposed to keep the ship seaworthy until 2012, but she only lasted another 2 years. On July 7th of 2002, the Nottingham left port in Sydney, Australia en route to Wellington, New Zealand. Along the way, one of the crew members suffered an injury, requiring them to make an emergency stop near Lord Howe Island. Lord Howe is a tiny island in the middle of the Tasman Sea. Thankfully, they had the means to treat the injured crew member and bring them back to Sydney. The Nottingham's commander, Richard Farrington, had flown with his injured crewmen via helicopter. He left a junior officer in charge while he got dinner on the mainland. As the story goes, that junior officer was plotting a route on the ship's map when he accidentally placed a navigational instrument over Wolf Rock, a well-charted rock formation off the coast of Lord Howe Island. During low tide, the rock sticks about 9 feet out of the water. This new course brought the warship right into the rock formation. Nobody realized until it was too late. It didn't help that the sea was angry that night either. The crew watched waves pick the ship up and slam it down onto Wolf Rock. Commander Farrington had just arrived back on deck when his ship ran aground. He was faced with a tough decision: ground the ship and risk it falling to pieces on the rocks, or sail back into the water and hope she doesn't sink. By some miracle, it didn't. Commander Farrington maneuvered the ship into calmer waters, and everyone made it off in one piece. He, however, was court-martialed for not being at his post when the collision occurred. The crash caused £26 million in damage. It was actually cheaper to repair the Nottingham than to give a similar ship the same facelift. She finally sailed again in 2004, but was decommissioned in 2010. When you assume, you make a you-know-what out of you and me. In the case of the MS Herald of Free Enterprise, when the crew assumed, they sank a massive ferry and lost 193 people. The MS Herald of Free Enterprise, or the HFE, was a ro-ro ferry operating in the UK. It was one of 3 ships designed to increase the loading and unloading speed of cars on deck. This meant more routes and, obviously, more money. All 3 ships had 8 decks numbered A through H from top to bottom. E deck was the upper vehicle deck. G deck was the lower main vehicle deck. The harbor HFE typically sailed from featured 2 loading ramps that could service both car decks. But on March 6th of 1987, the HFE found herself in strange waters. The HFE was making the route between the Belgian port of Zeebrugge to Dover in southeast England. She was docked in Belgium, which didn't have the 2-ramp system. To load both car decks, the crew had to fill the bow ballast tanks. This caused the ship to sink enough to align the deck with the ramp. Before leaving the harbor, the crew spent 2 hours emptying the extra water in the ballast tanks. While they got the ship to reasonable sailing conditions, it still carried too much weight. Still, the disaster that followed should have never happened. Assistant boatswain Mark Stanley had one job: close the bow doors before leaving port. Mark decided the loading process was the best time for a quick nap. He assumed he would wake up before the ship left. Let's just say he slept through his alarm. The HFE left Zeebrugge Harbor with the bow doors wide open. Meanwhile, First Officer Leslie Sewol was supposed to ensure the doors were closed. He assumed Mark was on his way to shut the doors and left G deck unattended. Disaster struck the moment the HFE set sail. Water flooded G deck, causing the ship to list and capsize in the shallow harbor. They hardly made it a mile away from the dock. Water surged into the engine room and fried the circuit board. The passengers and crew were left in darkness. Help came quickly as a passing ship noticed the sinking ferry. The Belgian Navy arrived to find passengers and crew members clinging to the side of the capsized boat. In the helicopter footage, you can see where the bow doors were left wide open. Assuming cost 193 people their lives that day. P&O European Ferries, owners of the HFE, were charged with corporate manslaughter. The case fell apart in court. Nobody was ever charged with the loss of 193 people and the sinking of the MS Herald of Free Enterprise. The MV Hu Osaka was a ro-ro vessel built in 2000. It was sold to a Norwegian company in 2008 and made regular trips between the UK and Germany. Technically, it's a pure car and truck carrier, or a PCTC. That means it only carries private cars, trucks, and heavy construction equipment. There aren't many people on board other than the crew. On January 3rd of 2015, Osaka left Hampshire, England with a cargo bed full of buses, Range Rovers, and construction equipment. It was supposed to stop in Bremerhaven, Germany for more cargo, and then Hamburg, Germany for a quick refuel. Unfortunately, she never made it out of England. The Osaka was about 265 tons too heavy when she left Hampshire. The ship developed a significant starboard list as the captain tried to execute a tight turn around the West Bramble buoy. Some of the cargo shifted, causing a stone cutter to break free and puncture the hull. Seawater rushed in, and the ship began sinking. The list got so bad that the vessel's rudder and propeller rose from the water. The captain had no choice but to ground the ship on the Bramble Bank, an arrowhead-shaped sandbar near the Isle of Wight. Thankfully, all crew members were rescued from the ship. While there was no major pollution, it did require a massive salvage operation to refloat the vessel and bring her in for repairs. Now, not only was the cargo 265 tons too heavy, but the ballast water system wasn't working right. To make a long story short, the chief officer believed he could eyeball the ballast water instead of relying on the gauges. If you enjoyed this video and want to see another just like it, then be sure to click the link on screen now. With that, thanks for watching, and be sure to tune in next time.